Ilse Hess. When we finished the last tape, you were telling us about how nursing mothers were able to go across the street to where the children were. And you had mentioned that some of the nursing mothers, it was found out later, were in their 80s. Can you pick up the story from there?
Yes, the Germans really didn't watch so thoroughly who came back. So they found a way, and by that time, Mr. Siskind had enough felt that my husband could do his own job and he could do his job, so he left it up to him whom he wanted to help. And most of the people he didn't even know. Only one evening his aunt, uncle, and his cousin and his sister came into the Schauberg. They were Dutch, but had also lived all their married years in Germany. And he tried to get them out and succeeded. Unfortunately, but a lot of people who were helped by these helpers did, they went back to their apartment and were picked up right away again. So the three of them disappeared, never to be heard of. But their son was snatched away by neighbors because they saw something very special in him. And he became, up to this day, one of the most famous chazan in Holland, and I would say maybe in all of Europe, and a world-famous biochemist. I always say the only thing what evaded him till now is the Nobel Prize. And it's an incredible family. In fact, a few weeks ago, he was honored by the Queen. In fact, he was sitting with his yarmulke next to the Queen for the wonderful work he did with his songs and Jewish music. He visits me quite often. He is ultra-Orthodox, the whole family. But a very, very unusual man, and each time if I see him, he's much younger than my husband was. I think of him that without my husband he really wouldn't be here. If they were caught doing this with the crash, with the babies, letting people out, they always tried to wiggle themselves out and saying it was the grandmother who wanted to see the grandchild for the last time in her life. It sometimes worked because they had an SS man who was stationed in the Schauberg all the time. That was his station at that time, who sometimes helped the Jews to get this done. This George Gerard, I have to bring this in, was very much maligned after the war as a real hell, as if it would have been their job to help the Germans. It really isn't true. I mean, we have been victims ourselves. They did a lot of good things. People were picked up without their dentures, without their medication, and they took care of all this. If you wanted to evade the Nazis and the NSBers, who were the Dutch Nazis, you had to leave the country or go in hiding. There was no other way to go. So this went pretty well I mean, was a terrible life for me. Each time the bell rang, I thought, now they're picking me up. At one point, our apartment house was rounded up. It was in the afternoon. We were all put against the wall. And the only people in this building were a couple of non-Jews. Not everyone was home during the day. And my children, 4 years old, alone in the apartment. So my husband walked towards the guard and asked him whether I could go back because these 2 children are all alone. And he said in German, "You Jewish pig, if you don't keep quiet, I shoot." And my husband said, "Shoot." And an officer noticed this. So he came and he said, "You have quite a lot of guts. Let your wife go home and you come with us." So he saw himself already on a punishment transport which went right away to Poland. But he jumped off the truck at night at a spot where the Germans didn't watch. They always let the Jews out at a certain side of the truck, and he jumped off and came home again. I do not know whether it was my husband's fate, his luck, or his misery, that he looked like 3 Nazis. He had blonde hair, blue eyes, absolutely Germanic mannerism, his speech, his walking, and sometimes I had the feeling that the Germans couldn't understand that they had to kill someone who looked so much like them. And this went pretty good, if you call this good, until about the middle of July. Then we were caught.
This is July 1940.
1943. 1943.
And what happened when you were caught?
We were caught in our apartment, and my husband showed them right away his Schauberg, and they said, "It's no good anymore." So we had to come with them. And there were hundreds and hundreds of Jews rounded up. By that time, quite a few of the helpers and colleagues of my husband from the Schauberg had been already deported to Westerbork. So we were taken to an open space, the Berneo-Kade. Open spaces like in all cities. There were no buildings, nothing. And left out of the trucks, hundreds and hundreds of Jews and children, and we have no food, and we were kept there for hours. The people who helped there from the Jewish Council were a different group as the Schauberg people. So they told my husband to show his armband and just mingle with them, because the Germans didn't know who is who. But he had great trepidation to do this and let me and the children alone. I advised him at that time to stay behind, but he didn't want to do this. So at this place we stayed about the whole day, the whole night, and the next day we were taken to the station on a train to Westerbork. We really were caught because we always had some contact, someone to ask for help Sometimes it helped, sometimes it didn't help, but this time we just found ourselves caught. So we came to Westerbork. Westerbork had been until 1940 a so-called transition camp for about 2,000 Jews from Germany who had crossed the border to flee Germany, but the Dutch said they couldn't absorb them anymore and opened this camp. I do not know what it was before, but it looked like a camp in a little better shape than when we came. And these people were taken to Westerbork. That was already since 1938, I think, after the Kristallnacht. And they had barracks, but the barracks were divided into compartments. If there was a family, they got a little bigger compartment, almost like a little corner house or so, and the others were divided into bachelor quarters. They had a stove, they had to work the fields, they had to cook for the Germans, but it was not a concentration camp. They could feed themselves, they could buy some things, they could get things from the fields. So it was a meager existence, but they were quite safe until the deportation from the rest of Holland started, which was 1900. It really started 1942, early 42. Meanwhile, they had built this barracks, some were horse stables, and it was an ugly sight to get there. There were about 700 people in each barrack, and there were about 20 barracks. There were always between 10,000 and 14,000 prisoners.
How did you and your family get to Westerbork? How did you and your family get to Westerbork? Were you taken?
We got in,
by train?
By train.
Do you remember, was it a short trip, a long trip?
A couple of hours. These trains were went very slowly, and they were old, regular trains. Some cattle cars were in, but it were dilapidated trains.
What was your first impression when you saw Westerbork?
The dirt. And not the dirt of the barracks, the dirt on the soil. There must have been dust in Westerbork 10-inch high. And when it rained, it was mud. You were really up to your knees in mud. And since it was summer, the flies were like a wall. It was unbelievable. I never saw such a dirty place. But it was not an extermination camp. So people were not really starved out by the time we came. The worst sight in Westerbork to us was a railway track through the camp. There were barracks to the right and to the left. In fact, a book has been written about it a couple of years ago, Boulevard der Misère. And this was this road through the camp. First, we didn't realize how terrible it was because we came pretty freshly washed, a little dirty, from Amsterdam. We were registered and we were assigned into a barrack. There were bunk beds, 3 beds high on either side. And in the center of these 2 rows was a wooden table, almost looking like a picnic table. And if you want to sit there or eat there, you had to sit on the lowest bed to get to the table. There were no benches or anything. The men were on one side of this barrack and the women on the other side. And on the very end of each barrack was a toilet for 700 people.
One toilet?
One toilet. During the day you were not allowed to use it, you had to go to latrines. One toilet, yes. And on the other side of a barrack there were some spigots with almost looked like a cement ditch where you could get a little bit of water and you could dump your food if you didn't want to eat it, and you could also empty your chamber pots. Most people wore wooden shoes, not as a sign that they are Dutch, but they are waterproof and keep your feet very warm. So the whole night these people walked back and forth to the toilet. If they made it, if they didn't make it, they went back, and you heard the shuffle of the wooden shoes. I started pretty soon to do something and organized a so-called kindergarten. There were a lot of children in Westerbork with another woman. I forgot her name, but I know she was from Dortmund. So we kept the children busy from morning till night. We still always had crayons along, which went always with us, and paper, and we danced and we jumped, and someone always had something from home. They didn't take anything away from you there. My husband had also not the worst job. He had to clean a small barrack, and I think one of the toilets or one latrine. But the food situation for us was not very critical, because among the old inmates, these are the people who were there before the deportations began, we found a relative, Herman Israel, a bachelor who worked in the potato kitchen, and he supplied us very well with food. We cooked on his stove a little bit and took it at night into the barracks with a blanket around to keep it warm.
Can you tell me how long you stayed in Westerbork?
What happened? I knew that all our friends were very busy to get us out, our Gentile friends. Now you would say, how is it possible that one Gentile cares about a Jew, right? But it isn't so. Through my husband's job and through his company, we had a lot of friends and some customers who really were concerned about it. Everyone knew we had twins, which is in Holland something very unusual. I always have to say, and this I have to say in between, that the Dutch people were not as wonderful as they are portrayed in the museum and in books. Before the Germans invaded Holland, the NSB, which is the Dutch Nazi, counted already 100,000 members. It's true that a lot of Jews were in hiding in Holland, but all in all, they were not the good Dutch people think. It just happens that we had very good friends, but that is a personal affair. So they tried to get us out, and also the Germans had at that time overplayed their hands that no one or very few were left in the Schauberg, and they were stuck with taking care of the Jews until the next transport. But this comes later. The worst happening in Westerbork was Tuesday morning, and the excitement started already Friday evening, when the whole camp knew that the lists for the next transport to Auschwitz, Sobibor, and Theresienstadt were made. Now, it is true that the head of Westerbork, or the heads of Westerbork, were mostly German Jews, and not because they wanted it to be, that the German appointed them, I always say, because of the language and because of the background, and they trusted them more. And this was a dawn in the side of the Dutch Jews. The fight between the Dutch Jews and the German Jews was unbelievable, very disturbing. Although a lot of Dutch Jews thanked their staying for a long time in Westerbork, and some even surviving everything, to German Jews. Let's say the head of the camp was a German Jew, the head of the doctors was a German Jew, and so on and so on. And I sometimes regret this situation. Books have been written about it, but it's history. It happened. So the Germans had sent a handful of Jews back to Holland to finish the job in the Schauberg. And at one point we were told that we would be released within a short time. We did not feel safe in Westerbork. Families with children, with small children, children under 16, were fodder for the Germans and would be deported almost immediately, because the children couldn't work and would only eat. So we really were afraid from week to week that we would be, maybe not even, maybe by mistake, put on a train to Auschwitz or even Theresienstadt, which was supposed to be a model camp. The truth is that a family with children that arrived in Theresienstadt would be deported to Auschwitz immediately or the next day. If not the whole family, then the mother with the children. So we were very afraid of this. Although we had covered all our flanks in Holland with hiding places, with passeurs, with stamps to grant us another 6 weeks, we never took advantage of it. So we were trapped. But at one evening, we were told that we would be released that evening. Stephen who had a recurrence of his ear trouble, for which he had been operated in Amsterdam already, was in the sick bay. So he had to be taken by stretcher to the train. And we hardly could believe that it was true. If we would have been the only 4 people to be released, we would have thought there is a catch. But with us, a few others were released, so we knew that there must have been a reason for it. We were taken back to Westerbork, to Amsterdam, with Stephen pretty sick and didn't have a place to go. Our apartment had been looted either the same day we were picked up or 2 days later. So my husband went to a friend's house. It was in the Jewish neighborhood of Amsterdam. And I was I think in the same street, also in a building where I had acquaintances, not friends. There I stayed with Marion and Stephen. I think it was the same night. The first thing I did, that I took everything we owned, which was very little, to a shoemaker, to a laundry, and to a cleaner, and to a seamstress. There were still a few stores open. I always have to say that it was not because of the Jews that they kept the stores open. The Germans also used these stores, so they didn't close everything at the same time. They are very well organized and get a devilish joy of keeping a store open and pick up the owners during the night. And then after I had done that, I had about 30 or 40 guilders in my pocket, which I sewed into a my daughter's doll's head that evening, because I had to do it at night since I didn't want her to see it. First of all, I was worried she would cry, and second of all, I was also worried that she would mention it. So she didn't know it. She used to continue to play with this doll. I saw my husband daily and told